everyone. Our first speaker for the afternoon is Alton from ROI Corporation. That's a really well-known practice brokerage. So he's going to talk about something about the market dynamics and forces as far as practices in their buying and selling is concerned. So without further ado, Bill.
Okay. So, as I said, my name is Bill Alton. I'm with ROI Corporation. We do valuations and sales of dental practices. So what does that mean for you? That means when you are ready to buy a dental practice, you come and see me because we have practices for sale, okay? So, let's get into this here. We're going to talk a little bit about the market for dental practices. This is the current situation for the dentistry. There's good news and bad news kind of thing. And generally speaking, in Canada, and I'm talking Canada-wide, not just GTA, not just Ontario, but in Canada generally, the dental population is growing faster than the general population. That means, for example, every year in Canada, there are about 900 dentists coming into the profession, but there's only about 500 dentists leaving the profession. So every year you've got 400 more dentists than you had the year before. And the number of dentists in the country is moving faster than the general population. So that means there are problems in some areas and opportunities in other locations. Most of the problems are in the urban areas, the bigger cities. Cities primarily the GTA, where you have a lot of dentists want to locate where all of the facilities are, the services, the specialties, that kind of thing. So in the cities, not only the GTA, but other urban areas, there tends to be a saturation of dentists kind of thing. So what that also means, though, is that there are opportunities in smaller locations. Everyone doesn't have to live in Toronto. There are lots of other smaller communities that are in need of dentists. So if you're looking for areas of opportunity to set up and buy a practice, I would encourage you to look a little bit north of the GTA and some of the smaller centers. I think there are some good opportunities there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with RK House, but RK House does surveys of dentists, and for the ones that participate in their surveys, they share the information, the results for that survey. So RK House, in one of their recent surveys, found that about a third of the dentists who participated, and generally you're going to get probably about 200, maybe 250 dentists participating in the survey, so it's a relatively small sampling. It does give you a good idea of what's going on in the market in general. So, and that recent survey by RK House found that 1/3 of the dentists who participated in the survey said, we're not busy enough, we need more patients. And that relates directly to the situation where there are probably too many dentists in the community in the area where those dentists are practicing. There's only so many patients to go around, and you've got a lot of dentists scrambling for those patients. So, now we're also seeing, since dental practices have to, they're looking for new revenue streams. They're trying to grow their practice. They're trying to get their production values up. We're starting to see the hygiene departments, the preventive aspect of dentistry practices are growing. So we're now seeing a move to 3 units of scaling, 3 and 4 month recalls rather than 6 or 9 month recalls. Basically, hygiene is a predictable, reliable source of income. So I would encourage all of you, when you have your own practice, pay close attention to your recall program, your hygiene program. That's because your hygiene is going to feed your restorative, and as I say, it's a good, reliable, predictable source of cash flow. So pay attention to that. The good news as well is that per capita spending on dentistry is increasing. We'll get another slide on that, but people are spending more and more money on dentistry. So even though there are more dentists, more patients are going for implants, Invisalign, veneers, different cosmetic procedures. So the amount per capita is increasing, so that is the good side of dentistry. That's the good news. The other sort of good news and bad news is that 30% of the general population do not visit a dentist on a regular basis. Now, that's where your growth is going to come from, okay? So I think not only the individual dentist, but the dental profession as a whole has to make stronger efforts to reach that segment of the community who aren't seeing a dentist on a regular basis, kind of thing. So it's important for the oral health of the individual, of the community, and I think the profession and you as a dentist have to do a better job of getting that message out so that 30% who are not coming on a regular basis shrinks. Okay? So these are some historical, just looking back over a 5-year period, and this was done a couple of years ago, but it'll give you the general idea. And you can see that, again, on the people who were surveyed by RK House, reported that over a 5-year period, their practices had grown. But over a 1 or 2 year period, their practices had actually shrunk. So what that indicates is that dental practices, primarily in the urban areas, primarily in the cities, are actually shrinking. So, and again, that is a reflection on the number of dentists coming into the major urban centers. Expenses are also coming down, but net income is also down when you look at the more recent history. Hygiene revenue a little bit down, not as much as general dentistry. Salaries expense. I mean, the message here is it's not enough to just be a good dentist anymore. You have to be a good manager. Okay, you have to watch your expenses. You have to know what's going on in your practice. So it's important that you stress that side of the business. It's not just about the dentistry. It's about practice management. Okay, so we can see, if you look at these numbers, you'll see that in Canada, dental spending is increasing quite a bit. So much that they're expecting by 2020, consumers will be spending $22 billion on dentistry services and products, kind of thing. So that's the good side of the equation. We can see that the public is spending more and more on their oral health care. Practice values increase in relation to the gross income. The most important part is watch your bottom line. Your bottom line is even more important to the value of your practice than your top line. And in fact, we've been seeing the values of Canadian dental practices rising over the last 10 years, kind of thing. So practices have been rising in value. Is that going to continue? Anyone's guess. Okay, the buyers. Where are the buyers coming from? 940 new dentists each year in Canada. You got about 200 per year passing the challenge exam. Canadian faculties graduate about 550 per year. So it's the point I was making before. There are more dentists entering the profession every year than leaving the profession. So such that in cities like Toronto, in some parts of the city, you have one dentist per 700 of population in that particular area. It's very difficult to sustain a practice with that kind of ratio. You need a minimum of one dentist per 1,200, or even better, one dentist per 1,500 of general population, unless you're doing very high-end stuff. If you're an implant practice, if you're doing a lot of cosmetics, it's a little bit different, but if you're a basic restorative practice, you need 1,200 to 1,500 patients to make a good living. It's not enough to pay the rent and pay your bank loan and pay the expenses. You need to make money for yourself. That's the whole idea. That's why you're in dentistry, is to make a good living. So where, location, where you set up or where you purchase is going to be very important relative to that competitive landscape. Okay. The sellers. There are about 22,000 dentists in Canada, and that translates into about 12,000 dental practices. We know that about 3/4 of those are sole ownership practices. So not partnerships, they're sole ownership practices. That's the bread and butter of the business. One dentist, 1 or 2 hygienists, 1 or 2 at the front, 1 or 2 assistants. That's the bread and butter of the business. That's 75% of dental practices. So 4 to 5% exit ownership each year. Now that is 4 to 5% exit ownership each year. That doesn't mean they're leaving dentistry. There are, some dentists they get tired of the whole administrative aspect of practicing. They still love dentistry. They still want to do dentistry. They just don't want the responsibilities of ownership anymore. So quite often, someone will sell their practice, but stay on as an associate in that practice, or associate elsewhere, or serve as a locum. But because they're leaving ownership doesn't necessarily mean that they're leaving dentistry. Also, we have probably half of the dentists in Canada are over the age of 50. So retirement is looming for a lot of them, and which is good news for the people of your generation. That's going to open up more opportunities in terms of buying practices from a retiring dentist or setting up your own practice as those dentists retire. So that's probably good news for the younger generation. Increasing the value of the practice, it's probably less relevant here because I think you're not practice owners yet. But important things to keep in mind is when you have a practice, if you have associates, put them on contract. Employees, put them on contract. Watch your premises lease. Extremely important. There are companies that specialize in negotiating leases, which I would recommend that. The lease of your facility is extremely important in determining the value of your practice. Because if you have problems in your lease that you may not have noticed, it's going to cause you problems later on down the line. Not just most dentists, but most people who sign leases, their main concern is the first page. How much per square foot? How much am I going to pay per month? How many square feet is it? Without looking at the next 50 pages that contain, most of the information that you have to watch out for. So have a lawyer look at it, or have a specialty company take a look at it. Increase hygiene income. We've already discussed that. Declutter is a fairly obvious one. Track services referred out. That's a good idea if you have a basic restorative practice. You're sending out a lot of endo, ortho, perio, whatever. It's a good idea to track that so you know how much you're sending out, where it's going. Because at some point in time, when the shoe's on the other foot and you're a seller and not a buyer, it's important to the buyer to know how much you're sending out, because the buyer will want to know if he can do that work himself and keep that in-house rather than sending it out. So just as if you're purchasing a practice, then you'll want to know from the seller, what are you sending out? If a seller is sending out his endo and you do endo, that's business that you can keep in the practice and increase that top line kind of thing. So that's important to track services that are being referred out. Okay. Oh, hang on a second. I think I just missed one. Expense control, we discussed that. Minimize write-offs. That usually means don't write off your co-pays, and it's illegal. Some practices do it because of competitive pressures kind of thing. They're worried about losing the patient. But if you're buying a practice, purchasing a practice, I suggest you take a look at that because you don't want to be inheriting a problem. Most practice sales these days are share sales, so you're actually buying the company. You're buying the shares of that company and you're merging that with your own professional corporation. So you want to make sure you're not buying a problem by putting yourself in the place of that corporation that you're buying. So write-offs are a big issue. It's a big problem when practices are changing hands, mainly because if you're buying a practice and they have a policy of writing off the co-pays or giving discounts, that kind of thing, it's hard to change the patient mentality on that. It's what they're used to, and then you try changing the policy to the correct way, which is collecting it and not writing it off. You are going to lose some patients because they've been accustomed to not having to pay that. So it's very important to look at that if you're considering buying a practice. Again, as buyers, if you're looking at charts, if you're looking at files, what you're looking for is active patients. So if you have your own practice, it's important to call those files for the inactive ones. So patients that haven't been in for 2 or 3 years, pull those files on a regular basis, keep them in a separate filing cabinet. Those patients may come back, but they're not what you can call an active patient. So if you're buying a practice and the seller says, okay, I've got 1,200 patients, and you pull 20 files just to take a look, and 10 of those files the patient hasn't been in for 3 or 4 years, then you're going to say, he doesn't really have 1,200 patients. He might only have half that many. So it's a good policy to keep inactive and active separate. You don't throw the charts away, but it's important from a buyer and a seller's perspective. Call your inactive files. Stay up to date with technology. Digital X-ray is certainly very important. I mean, I have some older practices that I sell still use the film processor. I get some young buyers coming to look at the practice, they don't even know what it is. They've never seen a film processor before. They've only worked with digital. So stay up with technology. Intraoral cameras, very important. Digital technology, especially, and now it's all about 3D digital, that kind of thing. But it is important to stay up in technology. It's an investment, but it's an investment in your practice. So, and marketing. These days it's all about Facebook, YouTube, social media kind of thing. And it's important to have a website. I mean, there are still practices out there without a website, which I don't understand, because that's how patients are going to find you. They're going to search online kind of thing. So you have to have a website. It's not really an expensive undertaking, but it's a good thing to do. So I think every practice should have a website because that's how people are going to find you. And of course, if you're in a selling position, you want to make sure that there's no decline in production. It's kind of natural for dentists when they're planning their retirement, even if they're 5 years out. Once mentally they've made that decision that they're going to retire and sell. Many of them, they relax. They take more time off. They slow down. And what happens is the production starts falling. So you as a buyer, you're going in and look at that practice, you're going to say, wow, the production's been less every year for the last 3 or 4 years. That's not good. So, maintain the production or try and get an increase kind of thing. Now the future, with again, so many dentists in Canada nearing retirement age, I think that is going to create opportunity for you. Either for purchasing a practice from a retiring dentist, and I would say that in terms of if you are buying a practice from a retiring dentist is probably the best scenario kind of thing, because then that dentist is not going to end up competing against you and trying to bring some of those patients over to another location. So, which is always a risk if a younger dentist is selling, and there's a good chance he's not leaving dentistry, he's going to show up somewhere else at some point in time. So that's why it's important to If you have associates, have them on contracts so that if they do leave, they're not going to be able to set up and try and steal your patients within a certain geographic area and over a certain period of time. So it's important to have associates on contracts. But if you're a buyer, buying from a retiring dentist that's the ideal situation kind of thing. So, as I say, many dentists exit ownership, but that doesn't mean they're exiting dentistry. We're starting to see the rise of the investor dentist in Canada. That means corporate dentistry. So you have firms now that own, the biggest one owns over 200 practices in Canada. There are smaller ones that might own 25 practices. You have individual dentists now that own 3 or 4 practices kind of thing. So from the dentist perspective, it makes sense because dentistry is one of our practices. So, growing population, we've seen that. Fee increases, I think you're not going to be seeing big annual fee increases. I think probably rate of inflation is about what you're going to be seeing. So I wouldn't count on fee increases to bail you out kind of thing. Insurance companies putting a squeeze on benefit plans, so you have to be prepared for that. But baby boomers, good news, they're spending. They're spending on dentistry. As I say, implants, crowns, veneers, Invisalign, all that kind of stuff. So the baby boomers, the retirees with money, are spending it on their health care. They want to look younger, they want to feel better, and oral health is part of that, so they are spending. So that's good news for dental practices. And again, I go back to that 30% of the population that's not seeing the dentist on a regular basis. That's where your growth is going to come from. Somehow, you have to be able to tap into that. So dentistry, it's a good profession to be in. It's a well-paid profession. Do it right. As I say, it's not enough to be a good dentist anymore. You have to be a good manager. And I think that's pretty much it, but just a couple of other points that I would like to say, and that is, if you're at the point of investing in practice, what I'm seeing these days is most buyers want big, so they want high patient counts, big cash flow, and they're prepared to pay for that because, for the most part, the banks are going to lend them the money, 100% financing. So we're seeing a lot of competition for the big practices. So practices that are grossing 1.5 million kind of thing, if I'm selling one of those, I might have 5 to 10 offers, people butting heads to try and buy those practices. I think the opportunity for someone who's prepared to work is some of the smaller practices, the practices that are grossing $600,000 a year, that kind of thing, with opportunity for growth. So if you have a retiring dentist who's only been working a practice 3 or 4 days a week, and as I say, his production is $600,000, but assuming that he's in a good location, has a good lease, that's where the opportunity is. So if you're prepared to invest some time and effort into doing a little bit of marketing, maybe you're going to extend the hours a little bit, open on Saturday, whatever. I think with those practices, there's less competition to buy them, and there's more opportunity kind of thing. You don't want to buy, if you buy a big practice and you're paying a big price, and for whatever reason, if you lose 10 or 15% of those patients, because maybe they're like the previous dentist, they don't like you, or who knows what. If you lose 10 or 15% of those patients, there goes your profit, because you've got these big loan payments to make. And so I prefer sort of I like the lower risk kind of opportunities kind of thing. So what I would say to you is don't ignore those opportunities. Don't be focused on big practices, big cash flow, big patient count. There are good opportunities out there in the smaller practices, and there are excellent opportunities in, I would say, some of the smaller communities, especially in Northern Ontario. I mean, I sold practices in North Bay, Thunder Bay, Sudbury kind of thing. Excellent practices that sell for much lower prices than the same practice would sell for in Toronto, for example. So it's just that when the time comes for you to be looking for your own practice, don't overlook, I would say, the medium-sized practices, and don't discount practices outside of major urban areas. That's where a lot of opportunities kind of thing. So make sure you have a good team around you. That means a banker, a lawyer, accountant, broker. So if you need referrals to any of those, then we can help you with that. We work with them all the time. Kind of thing. So I don't know. Any questions? Any?
You mentioned urban areas. Can you specify any more cities or towns?
Well, and here, I mean, aside from Toronto, you're talking London, Ottawa, Kingston. I would say probably any place with a population of 200,000 or more. Yeah. So, but the centers, as I say, the smaller communities, Woodstock, North Bay, Oshawa, Aurelia, any of those, there's very good opportunities.
Well, why do you think Ottawa still has potential on in terms of the dental population, since it's an also major city? Yes,
yeah, no, I know. It is. That's what I'm saying. It is a major city. It is a major city.
Yes,
So
there is a lot of people moving over here along to Ottawa because of better potential, better.
Oh yeah, I mean, dentists like Ottawa, because it's a lot of government workers with great benefit plans, kind of thing. So, any community can only support a certain number of dentists, kind of thing. So, dentists, they will follow the growth patterns. So Milton here, when Milton stayed a small community. Milton is a community just west of Toronto. Milton stayed a small community for a long time because they didn't have the water. There wasn't enough water to support a bigger population, so there wasn't any development going on. They put the pipeline in from the lake up to Milton. All of a sudden, Milton had water. They started building like crazy. Population poured in, dentists poured in. So now there's a lot of dentists in Milton kind of thing. So, but you follow the growth patterns kind of thing. And if you're in there early on and you build your patient base, then you're one of the lucky ones. It's the ones that come in late and they're trying to compete with established dentists, then it's a little more difficult. More difficult. So yeah. So you're in a great profession. It's getting more competitive all the time, but there are opportunities out there. So as I say, just surround yourself with the right people, and you'll be fine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thank you.
So I hope that was an eye-opener and with some good insights on people who are just on the verge of entering or just entered. As you know, Amjad, our instructor for the fundamentals course, he was talking to me about some about practices in Hamilton, and I just said, as a knee-jerk reaction, I said, "Oh, Hamilton." He said, "Abbas, think like a dentist." So what do you mean think like a dentist? He said, "In university, we were told there is a GTA and there is a dental GTA. So the dental GTA is much larger than the GTA. So think like a dentist." So and any quotes you get from me will be in the same accent as I heard them. So